I'm Jessica Peresta, host of the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Tom Hierck and Chris Weber, and they're educators, thought leaders, and education authors. Our focus today is on their book, Positive Behaviors Start with Positive Mindsets, 28 Actions to Motivate Students and Boost Achievement. Awesome book. Excellent read. So much to learn and think about. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you took a moment to help out the podcast. How could you do that? I got 3 ways for you. Number 1, you could tell a friend and share the links. Number 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And number 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. By doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
Certainly we aim to have this book, as the subtitle implies, be super practical for any practitioner, any educator. But certainly PLC teams would take a look at this book and say, hey, what does this first of the 4 mindsets mean to us? What are we doing already to support students in this area? And what have we just read or examples that we've learned that we could put into place?
I think we believe it should also be there for any pre-service teachers. As you begin your career, the notion of I belong in this academic community, isn't that what every teacher is striving for? To have every kid feel like, right? That there is that, the notion I can succeed, that the work has value. Which of these would we not want every teacher to have as part of their conversation?
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Tom Hierck has been an educator since 1983 in a career that has spanned all grade levels and roles in public education. His experience as a teacher, administrator, district leader, Department of Education project leader, and executive director have provided a unique context for his education philosophy. Chris Weber, EDD, is the principal of Oak Creek Elementary School in Irvine Unified School District, California. He earned his EDD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and has written books on professional learning communities, response to intervention, behavior, and mathematics that have supported well over 500,000 educators. Our focus today is Tom and Chris's book, Positive Behaviors Start with Positive Mindsets, 28 Actions to Motivate Students and Boost Achievement. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today, and thanks so much for being on the show. Say hi to everyone.
Hello, everybody. And Steve, it's a great opportunity for us and an honor to be with you and your audience. Another opportunity for Chris and I to talk about a book that we've had a chance to co-author. Chris and I really do enjoy working with each other. We've produced a number of books, and so the chance to share our craft, our work with another audience is always welcome.
Agreed. It's a book, and but more importantly and more accurately, perhaps it's a passion. It's what we've done and what we do and try to help others do.
Well, excellent. Glad to have you guys here. And so let's start with this. Why'd you both write Positive Behaviors Start with Positive Mindsets, 28 Actions to Motivate Students and Boost Achievement?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why do we write any books? We have other things we love to do, helping people. But I think what motivates us is we'd love to share with our awesome colleagues some of the things that we've learned and some of the things that we're doing. Oh, I wrote a book years ago based on some seminal research in the area of behaviors that really changed my professional life and practice. And it was kind of hey, here's the research on what is most important for students to develop in terms of their behavioral skills. And here's how you would do it in the context of a school. The first of the 5 domains within that seminal research is mindsets. It's foundational. This is what the researchers say and what we have found and what we believe. So this next book, the one that we're talking about right now, was Tom and I's attempt to dive deeper into the first of those domains, mindsets, and provide very practical ideas and examples about what we're doing in schools, my school, schools that we support in the area of mindsets.
Yeah, I think everyone is familiar, thanks to the great work of Carol Dweck on the growth mindset, and I think sometimes it stops there. We've been really fortunate. I've benefited greatly from Chris being in his current role because pretty much everything in the book has been practically demonstrated in the school that he's working in. So we had this sort of live research as we were crafting the book as well, to let people know that, yeah, growth mindset's important. But foundational to that are the other three mindsets. And so, the effort to get this out in front of our colleagues so that we see a notion of time spent on all these mindsets. If you do take the time to build them all, nothing but success is going to be the end result. So an opportunity to put this out in front, so that we expand the discussion on mindset beyond the growth mindset.
Excellent. I appreciate you guys sharing that. And so who are you hoping reads the book? I mean, who is your target audience? I mean, who needs to know about these different your different thoughts here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and not to pull back the veil too much, but when a publisher is considering your book, that's the question they ask. And I don't get frustrated by the question, but well, perhaps I do, because it's for everyone. And so the question is often, is this for every teacher out there, every educator out there, or is it for educational leaders? And one of my responses is, aren't we expecting every educator to be an educational leader? So that's a little cynicism, snarkyism, sorry. But truly, certainly we aim to have this book, as the subtitle implies, be super practical for any practitioner, any educator. But certainly PLC teams would take a look at this book and say, hey, what does this first of the four mindsets mean to us? What are we doing already to support students in this area? And what have we just read, or examples that we've learned that we could put into place? Of course, school principals, sorry, Tom, could also use this book as a primer, like, hey, let's book study this. And we've done it at my site, quite literally. So it's certainly something that any school or district leader could also use as a professional learning platform.
Yeah, it's almost the cradle to grave approach of an educator's career, right? I think we believe it should also be there for any pre-service teachers. As you begin your career, the notion of I belong in this academic community, isn't that what every teacher is striving for? To have every kid feel like, right? That there is that the notion I can succeed, that the work has value. Which of these would we not want every teacher to have as part of their conversation? In which school would we not want to have this discussion as part of a faculty growth? As Chris alluded to, book studies, this chance for colleagues to interact with each other, to say, okay, well, so how are we living this, right? So again, I think, from a new teacher through to a veteran who is, looking towards greener pastures beyond their careers as educators, this is going to be that book, I think, that can stimulate conversation at every phase of your career.
That's awesome. I appreciate you guys explaining that. I know that is something that I can imagine you get asked, and especially when you're going to publish. I'm sure that is a huge question from them. But when we talk about targeting audience and such, I think this is it is a powerful and practical book, and I can't wait for the audiences to listen and pick up your book. We've got it is, by the way, it's very readable. I love the readability of it and understandability. You're not having to sit there with a dictionary going, okay, or that's old school. That's old school, isn't it? Not necessarily, with an app that says, here's what this word means. And it's awesome. Before we go any further, I got to ask this. What's it like to work on a book with a colleague? I mean, together, because you're not next door neighbors as far as living.
Yeah, I don't think, and Chris, what is this now? 7 or 8 books we've done together. And I can honestly say in all of those books, Chris and I have never sat side by side crafting, right?
Wow.
It's always been, through calls, through, other sort of vehicles. We've had a chance to be in the same room together when we've been presenting on some of the work we've crafted. But yeah, no, it's been a back and forth. And, so I think from the first moment Chris came into my life, we just clicked. Right, we just had a a sort of common thought processing, and I think it's made it easier for us to craft the books. I don't know, Chris, what's your thing?
Well, you said it, we click, and so that's not unique. Other colleagues click. And when you co-author a work, you develop a plan. We don't always have the same plan, but it's rooted in the same collaboration on crafting first drafts and revisions. I do think this is a humble brag, especially when I say humility, but something I think we both possess as professionals and as authors, as practitioners, is we're passionate, and we're humble. So it helps immensely when there's no hurt feelings when a suggestion is made. It just doesn't exist between us. But also, you mentioned the books, Tom. I feel a little guilty and weird in a way because I think you've written more than I, but I think this was my 14th book, co-authored or solo authored. And all of them have pretty much been on the same topic. And the topic is we have significant needs in schools, and there are research-based and practical practices that work. We've implemented them, and man, they've had a significant impact, positive impact. Let's share that with others. So that's what we're doing. We're writing a book, but it's not fiction. So it's just helping, trying in an organized manner and in a collaborative manner to put it on paper so that others can read it.
That's awesome. I appreciate you all sharing that because it's you work well together. And I do have to say this, that lots of educators have thought about writing books, and even, the thought of working with a colleague. And prime example right here is that you don't have to be right next door to each other, and you can make it work out. So good stuff. All right. So we're getting ready to dive into your book. But before we do that, I'd like you to really talk about what's in your mind when you think of positive mindsets.
I'll start. Tom, as I mentioned earlier, there's seminal research. The primary author on this is from University of Chicago. Her name's Camille Farrington. It was a co-authored and project, and really, as the National Reading Panel did in 2000, it brought in all forms of educational researchers and psychologists from all flavors and points of view, and said, what is it? What are the critically important sets of behavioral skills? They identified 5 domains, the first of which were mindsets. And what struck me as important is, oh my gosh, this is it. There are 5 domains of reading. That's so helpful in shaping the teaching and learning of reading. There are 5 domains of behaviors. Well, we can wrap our heads around this and we can act on each of them. But the researchers are really clear that the foundational piece was mindsets. And as Tom said earlier, it's not just growth mindset. And that was an aha for me. Oh, wait a minute. There are these 3 other elements of having a positive mindset. Well, that's pretty important. And I think Tom said it well. I'll say it again. Perhaps the first thing, and maybe just maybe the most important thing you're doing in a classroom, is helping students feel safe and welcome, being connected to them, ensuring they're connected to you, the school, the classroom, the learning. That's the first element of a positive mindset, is having that sense of belonging. We've heard of this. We intuitively know it, or we more research-based know it. But did you know it's one of the 4 elements of having a positive mindset? Oh, wow. So it's exciting to me, because it's something that we knew, it's something we thought was important. Hey, it's really important. It's an important element of a positive mindset, and having positive mindsets is the foundational domain to having the social and academic behavioral skills that you need to be successful in school, career, college, life. So we can talk more about those elements of mindsets, but that's what we think of. That's what's going through my head.
Yeah, right. And we have this uniquely human condition called the negativity bias, right? And so, trying to overcome this, right? It's not just about making this determination, right? Think of a school example. You're walking down the hallway and there's some disruption. We're likely to walk past 15 kids doing all the right stuff to go talk to little Steven down the hallway who might be not doing the right stuff, right? And so this negativity bias that drives everything, we slow down to see an accident, even though the accident's been cleared. That's the negativity bias. Speaking from a positive mindset is a lot of hard work. And, as Chris and I were preparing this, at least from an educator's perspective, we didn't come across anything else that aligns this way, that speaks to needing to have a positive mindset, for it to being foundational, particularly in the sector of education, in order to grow all of our kids and produce what we think we ought to be producing in the system, quality adults. Right. So this whole notion of positive mindset, how do we articulate that? What's the work I need to do to overcome this negativity bias in a practical sense?
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And one of the things. So I'm going to use this to lead into chapter 1, which is it's titled "I Belong in This Academic Community," and you ask the question in this chapter, what does "I belong in this academic community" mean? So what does it mean, and why is it important to understand this?
So Chris just touched a little bit on that whole notion of belonging, right? Your audience will be familiar with the work of Maslow. Everybody knows Maslow's hierarchy. Belonging is the critical piece of that. I think we're doing a pretty good job in schools today on the safety needs, the physiological needs. I think the goal of schools is the achievement levels and the self-actualization levels. But right there in the middle is that whole sense of belonging. In the absence of belonging, we are not going to get achievement or self-actualization. In the absence of belonging, we're not going to see the kinds of growth that we need to see in schools. And we know right now we're still in a curious time. The pandemic by and large is in the rear window now, but the collateral damage from that is still there, right? And so do we have a sense of belonging? Does every kid feel like they are known when they go to school? Do we know every kid by name and by need? Right? That whole notion of it being foundational to anything else occurring. So kids coming to school each day saying, hey, I belong. I feel like there is a place for me here in this school, is the linchpin for anything else to happen.
I think for my school now, the need is more obvious, but it exists at every single school. We have 70 languages represented. 34% of our students are learning English, multilingual kiddos. 13% of those are brand new to English, to the country, to the community, to the school. Can you imagine how important a sense of belonging is for a child like this? But I would say that's dramatic and overtly obvious. But every kiddo has that need. Every person has that need. So our challenge and the chapter and why is it important is because identity, seeing oneself, one's family, one's culture, one's religion to the extent possible and appropriate, represented within the school is so critical. We're increasingly asking our students, so we ask our families and we ask our students, the extent to which they feel like they belong. We ask it in a variety of ways, but we directly ask that. And the feedback is sometimes sobering. It's humbling. So I'll leave it with this is there's not a teacher in the world who doesn't set out to create a welcoming environment in which relationships are fostered. Let's make it more intentional. Let's make it a huge priority, and let's measure indirectly and directly the efficacy of our efforts.
Excellent. That is something to think about. And it impacts kids at such a level, but it's something that even as adults we should understand how much it impacts us. Whether you're that teacher in that building or whether you're whatever you're doing in life, even living in a neighborhood, if there's some sort of belonging that you feel like you're a part of, it's things are so much better. But definitely in that classroom where there's any number of things that can make you feel detached from the teacher or what's going on. So I appreciate.
When I talk about the collateral damage of the pandemic, I think that's where it took the biggest hit, right? We were told we had to isolate, be apart from. We lost community. We lost a sense of belonging, both in the adult and in the kid community. We told people to get better at being individual, and people got better on devices. And I think for some, it's been a slow reconnect back to community, back to being part of something larger than self, right? And I think that's the struggle, that we still see today in recreating. What does it mean to be part of our family here in our house? right? And so I think the intentionality has to be there to build that. Chris is giving some data sets on his school. As I travel, look, it's not as unique as it might have once been. We're seeing more and more now of this notion of how do we integrate? And if you don't feel like you belong in school, someone else is going to come along and make you feel like you belong. And it's not necessarily going to be in a positive vein.
Well, you get that right. One of the things that I experienced in a community where I was as a director of a regional educational service agency, the very rural area, and the kids during COVID would come together in a parking lot of a mall that they had hours in the community, and so the police would, they basically would come in this area, and the police would kind of stay in the background to remind them not to get too close. But other than that, the kids would they wanted to have contact with each other, and it was pretty amazing thing to see as they maintained trying to follow rules, but at the same time they wanted to see each other.
Yeah.
So powerful. They're all high school level kids. So good stuff. All right. So I got to say this about the formatting of the book. You have reproducibles throughout your book. In chapter 1, there's one called What I Want My Teacher to Know, and one titled Gratitude Journal Prompts. There are many more throughout the book. Talk about why you included the reproducibles.
I don't know. I'm sure, Tom, you would agree. I don't know many people, myself included, who wants examples from which I can work, even if I'm not using them the way they were initially presented. That's just, I think, increasingly respectful thing to do. It's not always, there isn't always direct links between what it is we're suggesting to be done and the reproducible, or with some more complex things like systemic changes and all of the work that goes on there. I'm not sure how you reproducible that. But in this instance, we're talking, I mean, the intent of the book, the subtitle of the book is, hey, here are some things you can do to promote more positive mindsets, to nurture them, to teach them, to practice them. Another reason for me, Tom, is I read the words, I'm an educator, I read these words, they make some sense to me, but what helps me connect more to the concept is when I see it represented in an example, something that I use myself as a professional or that I use with students.
Yeah, right. And again, the tools in teachers' hands. Let's be clear. Chris and I are not saying you must be using these exactly as presented. We're not being that prescriptive. But if there's an entry point for you to take that tool, massage it a little bit, gather some information, the two you just identified, Stephen, gives us good insights to the kids we have. The more we know, the better we can plan our instructional design and delivery, the better we can build that academic community. Chris talked about representation. Look, if I am, new to, and I look around and I don't see anybody like me, or I see only people like me in certain roles, if I'm not represented anywhere, it's hard to feel like I belong. But how do I know that as a teacher? We're not trying to fault educators because they've missed something. Sometimes it's a lack of other evidence. Go back to what I said earlier, knowing every kid by name and by need starts to really drive what we do next. So tools throughout the book we've just found are really helpful to our colleagues, give them some way to sort of, capture some of the text that's there, some tools that they can gather some of the things in and practically figure out what belonging means.
So powerful. And I know as an educator, I've always loved it when the authors provided me, if nothing else, a visual of what they've been talking about so that I could take it and make it my own type of thing. And you do a great job with that. So thanks so much. In the opening of chapter 2, this is said, when students and staff believe they can do something, they are much more likely to be successful at doing that thing. Can you talk about this statement and chapter?
Yeah, it's research. Just as connectedness and a sense of belonging and relationships is, research has shown when students have high levels of that with their teacher, with their school, they learn at higher levels. Self-efficacy is the thing, when we believe we can do something, when we have that positive attitude going in, we're much more likely to be successful doing it. So as a teacher, I have confidence in myself and in my students. Students are going to achieve at higher levels. Students too. I have one of the things I do that's represented in the book in a variety of ways is, and I'm sure most administrators do this, is I visit classrooms all the time and give the students mini lectures. I hope they don't think they're lectures, but mini talks. And one of them recently was on mindsets. That was one of our monthly areas of focus, of course, as it should be. And I was aligning it to athletes that they know. A lot of my students are really big soccer fans. It may not be the case around the country, Canada or the US, but I get the question all the time, Ronaldo or Messi? And I have my answer. But also I talk to them about, when a penalty kick is happening, against this is contextually relevant for them. Does Leo Messi stand in front of that ball and think, I'm going to shoot this wide right, or it's going to go straight over the bar? No, he or she would visualize it doing exactly what he wants or she wants it to do. And that's because it makes a difference. It matters. So then, I'm silly and I say, when's your next math test, Mr. Hierck? Oh, we have a we have a new math test next week. Okay, boys and girls, here's what you're going to do. Before that math test, I promise you, this is important, and I'm asking you to promise me you'll do it. That paper's on your desk, the pencil's in your hand, but you haven't started it. I want you to say to yourself, I'm going to do an amazing job on this. So it is research based, but it's also just a positive way to be. And of course, that positivity and one of our PBIS inspired top, what would you say, themes, like respect, responsibility, and readiness, or whatever those things are for a school. One of ours is winning attitude. And so I liken it and align it with that. So yeah, that's I think encapsulates what it is that we mean by that.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting. The Ronaldo Messi debate is almost bloodletting with two of my grandsons. So they are on opposite sides of the equation, and it continually gets us at the dinner table a little wound up. But that notion of, so, if I think I can, right? Dweck talks about the view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you lead your life. Do you think you're a difference maker? Do you think you're capable? Do you take that approach, right, before going into, and I think the more we can start to build that in our kids, the greater likelihood that that's what they go through school with, that it is possible. That doesn't naively mean that everybody is all of a sudden going to accelerate into the upper echelons of mathematics, and we're going to have no kid get less than 98% in mathematics. No, it means they're going to be confident going in, that they know what they are capable of doing, that they understand their strengths, and and work to get to that proficiency levels at a minimum in the stuff that we've identified as important.
That is awesome. It's by the way, so Chris, which one, Messi or Ronaldo?
Yeah, Messi. They're amazing, but it's not close to me. They're probably the two best players ever. But
yeah, I agree with you. I'm on that planet. That's so I had to ask but what you're talking about there is so important because if like you said at the PK. They're going up there and they're thinking all kinds of other things like, oh my gosh, that guy in the third row is telling me that he hates me or something like this, or I'm reading this sign, or yeah, it's not going to work. Or, it's just like in what we do and everything that we, that you do as people and as kids, and people get inside, things get inside your head and stuff like this. And you got to have that, understand that you can do this. It's funny, yesterday in my organization, we had a celebration event, and I gave in and did something that I've managed to not have to do over my career as an educator. And this is going to sound really crazy, but I've managed to avoid doing karaoke. All right. And yesterday there was no way to escape when I was asked, come on, you're going to do it this time. And I did karaoke. So, you just walk up there and read the words and go with it. And hopefully it's sounds.
The video, Stephen.
What's that?
Video evidence.
Video evidence. I'm sure several of them made this. I'll have to get a copy of that because they were quite, yes. So, but with that being said, I mean, it's just, having that confidence you can do this is so important, so much in what we do. And we learn so that as adults we keep moving forward with that. So I love that chapter. Throughout the book, at the end of each chapter, you have a section called Action Items. What are you hoping the reader will do when they read these sections?
It's, we don't add those to the ends of chapters arrogantly, I hope, as in, now here's exactly what you need to do. On the other hand, out of respect, we want to say, hey, here's some prompts for you, some thinking starters, some conversation starters, some collaborative conversation starters. That's really the intent of it, and it's things we do, we've done. So I do fear sometimes it sounds a little more prescriptive. And Tom used that word earlier, and it's certainly not our intent. It's just certainly out of respect, and I think we're hoping to have a conversation with our colleagues, if you will, through the book, and so that's just, I think, a natural part of the conversation is, hey, you've read this. What do you think? And how does it relate to what you're doing? And what would be a modest next step you could take? And how might you measure the efficacy of those efforts? So yeah, to really just kind of the end of the conversation on that particular idea before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, it's really, framed around your next first step, right? We have such high regard and respect for our colleagues in this profession, but we know everybody's got something that they can grow in. So after reading the chapter and looking through this, what do you see as your next first step? Hopefully the action plan gives you an entry point, not to compare to anybody else, but just where you are right now. Where's your team right now? As you look through each of the mindsets, how might you begin to add some more to what you're doing? Where are the hard spots? Celebrate your successes. You should be able to chronicle that through the action plan as well.
Awesome. I love it. And it really gets you thinking about what you just read, and gives you some ideas about where you can go with it. And I love those sections of each chapter. So kudos to you. One of the things that I have to say is that I used to ask authors, so what's your favorite chapter? Well, I learned to stop doing that, because a lot of times they'd start saying to me things like, well, that's like picking my favorite child or something like this. And oh, come on, you have a favorite child, right? So I got out of that business, and instead I turned it around and chose my favorite. And my favorite is chapter 4, and it's titled, My Ability and Competence Grow with My Effort. And in this chapter is this statement: we became educators not to chronicle what is, but to make a difference in what could be. You got to talk about that.
Yeah, so I think again, any colleague I've ever talked to, and we get to, so why'd you choose this? Because you know what, being an educator is not for the faint of heart, right? Everybody tells me, to make a difference. All right, so how do we go about making a difference? Because if you got into this just to be, the historian, the chronicler of what is, then this job, pardon my language, but it sucks, because it is fraught with more negative challenges than, if you're not taking time to see the growth, to celebrate, to focus on what you did to move a kid from point A to point B. For that kid, that kid who came in 3 years behind in reading level and you grew 18 months, man, you made a difference in that kid's life. You have set that kid up for success, right? We have to keep remembering the current circumstances a student faces do not determine the end point. They just determine the starting point. And that collectively we have the capacity to make a difference, right? To grow that kid. And it comes down to the evidence. Chris outlined a bunch of evidence they have. Well, here's what I know for certain with Chris and his team. They're using that evidence to make plans, not to make excuses, right? So if you're just going to be a chronicler of what is, then it's going to be the lament. You're going to constantly gather to confess other people's sins, and you're going to feel like you can't do anything. And so this book will be on a pile of other books that all these educators wrote, but doesn't make a difference because we can't. Versus, hey, wait a minute now. We got this chance. We got this team. We have such outstanding adult talent in every school. Now, when we, come together and agree that we're difference makers, oh my goodness, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, A lot in that last chapter. That last chapter, by the way, that's Dweck's work. That's a growth mindset, stated in the way that the researchers elected. By the way, the titles of each of these chapters aren't Tom and I's language. We wanted to respect and honor the original work. So those are the 4 elements of mindsets as written, with the same words that the researchers included in that foundational research. But it's what I connected with what Tom's saying, and I completely agree, is, if we want students to have positive mindsets, guess who has to have the positive mindsets first? The adults. But I think this last one, and it's interesting, it's your favorite chapter. I don't think it's my favorite chapter. Maybe I have one. It's not that. I like them all. But it's there are things that we're doing. Standards-based grading is one of those things that we're doing in education. And if you unpack standards-based grading, lots to it. But one of its most important and foundational elements is it's promoting a more positive growth mindset. It's giving students hope and efficacy throughout the assessment and grading and reporting process. Lots more to it. I won't get into it, but the point is, I think when we do things in isolation, and it's inevitable, right? Because wow, there's many initiatives. Maybe there's not many this year, but there's a new one next year, and there was a new one last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. Taking time to say these concepts are connected, and here's how they're connected, and here's how they're foundationally important is critical. So I'm using standards-based grading as an idea and all the things attached to it. When you do it and you do it well, those practices are going to lead to students believing that their ability and their competence grow with effort.
That's awesome. I love it. This is the book. It does an awesome job of giving the activities, the ideas, helping to stir those thoughts that educators would have about how to, keep that positive focus and make that difference, and identify those things that they maybe, didn't realize that was impacting kind of the room or something like this. When you choose that day not to be happy, or happy may not be the right word, but have a positive focus. I got to ask you this. If you were talking with an audience of educators about your book, Positive Behaviors Start with Positive Mindsets, 28 Actions to Motivate Students and Boost Achievement, what is something that you would want them to remember when they left your presentation? They walk out of there and you don't want them talking about anything else. This is that one thing they got to remember.
Yeah, I think I would say 2 things. First, research has shown, and I think intuitively, audience, behavioral skills are as critical or more critical than academic skills for success. Okay. But let's say because of pressures or philosophies, it's academic outcomes that you want to be increased and at a super high level. Okay. That's going to be dependent upon behavioral skills. And behavioral skills are dependent upon positive mindsets. So it starts with positive mindsets. So let's talk about that. And oh, by the way, you're doing some of these things, and we can always do them better.
Yeah, just that whole notion that this is absolutely foundational. It's a challenge because you might not get the immediate bang for your buck, right? If Stephen's struggling with fractions and I do this brilliant little fractions lesson and he instantly shows me he can add fractions, wow, right? This is more of a slow build, but it's absolutely essential that from the time a kid enters the school system in this 13-year experience we're calling education, that we take great comfort in the fact that they leave fully believing in their own capacity, right? Our jobs are not to create good grade 3 kids or good grade 7 kids or good grade 11 kids. It's to create good adults who are armed with a sense of self, who know that they can take on the next challenges, who believe inherently in their capacity. Well, the takeaway's got to be, this is doable, right? This is doable. It's measurable. As Chris has alluded to, any measure you tell me about that you want in school, we have an easy track back to. It begins with mindsets. That's the takeaway.
Excellent. Love it. Tom and Chris, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
Go ahead, Tom.
So my website, tomhierck.com. If you're on X, it's just at @thierck. Any other social media platform, first name, last name, Tom Hierck, you'll find me there. Gmail is the quickest way, thierck@gmail.com. I try to get back to colleagues within 24 hours.
Same, my website is just chriswebereducation.com, and the email address isn't hard. It's chris@chriswebereducation.com. We're proud of our partnership with Solution Tree. They are, this is, I don't think, an opinion. They're the preeminent educational publisher and professional development provider in North America. We both love them and are grateful for them. So, gosh, you can find tons more of our work and information on how to connect with us through Solution Tree as well.
Excellent. I'll put that information in the show notes so it's easy for the listeners and to go out there and reach out to you. So good stuff. I got one last question for you both, and it goes this way. Do either of you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Well, I have had that opportunity. My mom was a school secretary, a principal secretary in the school in which I was working in. So long after I left, she was still working there. And my high school English teacher, I was lucky enough to have him 2 years, made a massive difference in my life. I won't go into great detail, but one thing that makes me giggle is, as we're talking about standards-based grading, I know I mentioned it a few times. It's a very important thing to engage in. It happens to be a next step, an initiative at my school, so it's on my mind. But Mr. Franzen used standards-based grading in 1986, 7, and 8, when I was a sophomore, junior, and senior in high school in our English classes. And so ahead of his time, but his most important attributes weren't his grading practices or his instructional practices. It was his mindset practices. So yeah, he was a special one.
Nice.
Yeah, no, and I would, echo what Chris has just said. Again, fortunate in the work we now have. I had a chance to go back and work with my old high school and get back to interacting with. Look, let's be clear. I owe everything I have today to educators who took a flyer on me, who took a belief in me, who cultivated a mindset, because I got to tell you, I never believed in any of this as possible. Right. I had a bit of a hard scrabble life. I didn't have good role models in front of me. But gosh, when Mr. Springer in grade 6 said, "I'm going to put you on student council," and I said, "Absolutely not. I could never imagine standing in front of a group of people and talking." I think he knew more about me at that point than I knew about myself. And so it's a reminder to our colleagues, right, that again, the current moment isn't what we're dealing with. We got to play it forward. I've got a list of teachers that I've been able to go back to now and say thanks to, and sit down and have a chat, and that's the joy of this profession.
That is awesome. Tom and Chris, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, Positive Behaviors Start with Positive Mindsets, 28 Actions to Motivate Students and Boost Achievement. Awesome focus, practical information for success in the classroom. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your audience.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.